Hello, everyone, and welcome to our continuing series of classes sponsored by the Sandy Granite Family History Center. Tonight, it's our pleasure to have with us not only an expert genealogist, he has his fingers and toes and shovels into about everything that has anything to do with family history and genealogy. And not only that, he's a very good friend and chairman of the board for the Family History Guide Association. He does a lot. He writes, is it 3 blogs that you now write for, James?
Just 2.
Just the 2?
Oh. Yeah, I had to cut back.
You had to cut back. Okay. And he's a frequent presenter. He's a missionary over at the BYU Family History Library and does lots of video production for them in different areas. And I'm sure you've seen him do presentations and webinars through the BYU Family History Library on their website. And James is all over. So if you spell genealogy, it comes out Tanner. That's how you spell genealogy. Okay. It's a pleasure to have him with us tonight. And we'll before we turn the time over to James, a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, this class will be available on the Sandy Granite Family History Center website. And I'll put that up in the chat. It's www.granitefhc.com. And then over on the website, you'll have tonight's class plus dozens of other classes from notable presenters that we've had over the past years. They're available to you for free, 24/7, 365. And we will be, if you have a question during James' presentation, you can put it up on the chat, or at the end, you can bring it up to him. We'll have a question and answer session to take care of that as well. So without any further ado, James, take it away.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to be here tonight. And if I know lots of people that can't spell genealogy, so that was helpful from you, Bob. The topic today is called Map Your Way to Genealogical Success, and we'll get right into it. Mapping events in your ancestor's life is a fundamental part of genealogical research. Now, the reason for this comes about not by a design, not just because of genealogy. It's something that has been created as a result of decisions by many people over probably the last couple of 100 years. And that is how large collections of information are cataloged and how they are housed in various institutions, archives, repositories of all kinds, societies, libraries. And basically, beginning back in the 1800s and some earlier than that, the issue was, how do you organize all this? Well, as it goes, genealogy as such became the category, and books about family history and genealogy in libraries are cataloged together. And then, but within genealogy itself, there has to be some way to organize the books and the records of genealogy. And the natural outgrowth of that was to organize everything geographically. So records from the United States are organized in the United States, and every state's part of that, and every county's part of that, and a lot of municipalities and cities are also part of the organization structure. And then every country of the world, literally every country of the world, is in a category. And in many places, like the BYU Family History Library, they're in alphabetical order. So you don't really get a geographic grouping of the webs of the various collections, but they're not side by side. In other words, Ireland isn't necessarily next to England, and England isn't necessarily next to Germany or anything like that. They're all kind of separate. So part of the challenge, if you will, of getting into genealogical research is understanding this process. Now, as on-site websites were developed, websites that like Family Search and Ancestry and MyHeritage and Find My Past and there's quite a few others. Basically, they had to adopt, because of this pre-existing structure, they adopted the only obvious way to do that, and everything they have is also organized geographically. So if you want records on a specific person, you don't go to that person, you go to that geographic location of the events that occurred in that person's life. That's where the records are going to be kept. And so with that fundamental concept of how genealogy is organized, as we move into the very first rule of genealogy, and that is that when the baby was born, the mother was there. Now, this sounds little, this may seem a little bit off the wall, but basically, if you think about it for even a second, you'll realize that it's a physical reality. Babies were born, and the mother had to be there physically present when that baby was born. But you will be, I doubt if you've done any genealogy at all, if you've be surprised to see how many times that's sort of ignored by various people when they start looking and say, well, this child was born here in Arizona, and the mother was in Massachusetts. And you go, well, okay, but how did the mother get to Arizona to have a baby and then get back to Massachusetts? So we say that here in the United States, and it sounds like, well, yeah, that doesn't sound very logical. So it's probable that that baby was not the baby, the child of that particular mother, and there must be some kind of misunderstanding or mistake. Well, that seems kind of obvious if you say it like that. But what if I say something like, well, okay, so the mother was in Lancashire and the baby was born in Kent. I mean, does that come, if you're very, very familiar with English geography, then that also comes up to mind, say, no, that's going to happen, not going to happen. Now, if the further you go back in the past, the more, let's call this strict, this particular rule is, simply because of the lack of transportation. And if you're talking about anything before 1850, you probably have been limited. And I'll talk about that in just a minute and get a little bit more information. So if you go into the Family Search family tree, or any family tree, any one of the programs out there, if you go in there, and what you need to do is make sure all the dates and places are consistent with the time frame. So that's the three things: the dates and the places, and then in the context of the time frame when the events were supposed to occur. And that's the question. By just looking at it, you can say, well, okay, this baby was born in 1710, and the parents were born in 1805. Obviously doesn't work. Parents cannot be born after the baby is born. But you'd be surprised, you would probably not if you've been looking, that mistake is often made. And the admonition that comes with that is do the arithmetic. In other words, every time you see a date and a place, I was just in the last couple of weeks that I was looking through entries, looking for entries, and found a family with 10 children, and all 10 children had been born between the time that the mother was born and when she turned 12 years old. And so all of these things, it's just not, it's not great mathematical ability. It's simply being able to look at these, what's there in the record, and make some sense out of it. So let's see what that looks like. So For example, here we have Peter Sutton, born in 1781 in Billinge, Lancashire, England, and then Anne Sutton and Mary Sutton and Thomas Sutton and Henry Sutton. And if you look at this real quick, you'll see a couple of things that you should notice in any kind of entry. First of all, we have two children that were born in the same year. And interestingly enough, they were born in different places. And so is this possible? Physically possible. But given the date of 1784, it is highly unlikely. And so the question that comes up immediately when you read an entry like this, and this, by the way, was copied right out of Family Search Family Tree. Why were two children born in the same year in two different locations? And when you ask that question, then you have to get into the historical context, and which is the time frame and the actual location of these places. So we take that one and say, well, that's probably the one that's out of place because all the other children come from the same place. So now let's look at what happens there. And it's, if you were enough to extend this a little bit further in the way in looking at these entries, you'll notice that they're all say Lancashire, England, and the United Kingdom. Well, no, that's not quite right either, because the United Kingdom was not formed until 1801. So the place names are also technically wrong. That's not the correct selection. Now, so this is just the kind of thing that I'm talking about when we talk about the importance of the location. So let's just check here on this map. This is Google Maps. We're going to just check the distance from Billinge to Ashton in Makerfield, and we'll see how that works here. So first we're going to go get the directions from Billinge to Ashton, and it comes right up. And then we see it on the map, and we can see that it's about 4.2 miles, and it would take about 9 minutes in the car. And this is the process that you go through. In other words, you go to Google Maps, which is available, or any of the other mapping programs, and just tell the distance and the time it would take to go that far. It's 4 miles, and walking, it would take maybe 90 minutes, or maybe if you were a mother expecting and you were racing across that distance to have your baby someplace so you could grab the baby and run back to Billinge, you can see that would be a little bit far-fetched. Well, this is within the range of the distance that even back in the 1700s was possible. But the question is still that the two children were born within the same year. And so we need to look further. And so if there's a back and forth kind of thing, then you have to come up with some reason why that occurs. Otherwise, what you're looking at is someone who has been put into that family that does not belong. Okay, so more research, I'm not going to go through the research, but more research showed that the extra child was not part of that family. And then here's the resultant list of the children. In other words, there were more children than had been found originally. And in addition, they're all consistent in where they were born. And there is, this is not a great deal of it does not taking a great deal of effort. It's something that you can look at consistently, look at on any one of someone's family tree. If I wanted to do this, and I always have this standing offer to anyone to let me go through their pedigree with them in about maybe a few minutes, I will find this kind of an error in a pedigree. It's not because the people that are maintaining the pedigree aren't competent or know what they're doing. It's just that, especially in the way that genealogy has evolved, that these errors are sometimes passed down through traditional family genealogies that have been given to people. And then because of that, and the time frames in which those were done, there were these kinds of errors. But today they're still being made. People are still adding in duplicates and adding in structures that aren't correct. So unless you happen to know the distance between all the places mentioned in your family tree, you need to map them each time you work on a particular family. So the first thing I do when I look at a new family that I'm going to look at, or a new person, and see if they were married or whatever, is I focus on the place where that person lived. And then as I focus on that, I put it on the map. If I have multiple children listed, I make sure that I check every child and put every place in every event. Now, as time passes and you get closer to the present, it's very possible for somebody to fly from Los Angeles to New York and have a baby and then fly back to Los Angeles now. And because of that, we have on our head that isn't a problem. Well, it still may be a problem, and it may be a problem simply because it's not the usual thing that happens. It's not what normally happens in people's lives. So you need to be more on the side of what would happen in a regular, normal situation, rather than imagining the fact that somebody could do that today, and then applying that back in time. So here's a book that was written back in 1932 as part of the Carnegie Institution of Washington. And it was put together by this Charles Pollen. And then it shows maps, and these maps had different kinds of things, rates of travel in different years, and how fast it was. So if you look at the upper left-hand corner, you'll see in 1800, the lines are all really, really close together, and the dates. And then as you move across to 1830 and so forth up to 1930, with trains, you have time frames that are basically a matter of a few hours or one day, as opposed to weeks or months in some cases. And also down below, there's the river system, which shows you how fast, where the people could actually travel if they were traveling by boat. Those are the navigable river systems in America. And then down below are the post roads, the major roads that were in existence in different time periods. So when you get back into the time in the 1700s and going backwards, you'll see there's only mainly one road, north and south, in America. So, and that road was not what you would think of as a road. It was simply a connection of paths, of dirt paths coming down from there, primarily used by foot traffic and not by vehicular traffic. Wagons could ride on it as long as it wasn't raining or there was no difficulties. Okay, so here's a blow up of the time frame for the rates of travel in 1800. So gives you a good idea that you wouldn't necessarily want to say that somebody was born in one of the other states from New England, for example, or even within New England itself. Now, why is that? Well, you think about traveling today, you get in your car, you drive, you'll go 500 miles in a day or whatever, and that's sort of a normal distance. But back then, if you were going to go and it was going to be a week, you'd have to plan ahead. You don't know who's out there. You don't know where you could stay. You've got to take everything with you that you could possibly use, and you've got to be able to sustain yourself for the length of the trip there and back, with what you happen and carry with you. And so it's not a matter of just walking out the door, shutting the door, and walking off into the forest, but it was basically a major expedition. So here's an interesting account of Thomas Jefferson's travel from Monticello to Washington, D.C., to Washington. And I've put the link in here. But basically, what it does is it tells in detail day to day how long it took Jefferson to make trips to Washington, D.C., back and forth, and the things that they encountered, from the fact that they would find wagons mired up past their wagon wheels in mud, and take a great deal of time getting from place to place. So this is, it's the reality. And any jury in the 1700s was more than one day was perilous and difficult, and not to mention the danger of being out in the wilderness, which generally speaking was every place except right in the middle of towns, and that was not, and then the complete lack of any kind of support system. There was no 911, nothing like that. There's no way to get help if you become injured, or if your vehicle or your whatever breaks down. So thinking about this is reality, and that's what's happened, and how that applies to genealogy is direct. You need to think about how the things that you're documenting there in Family Search, Family Tree, or in some other venue, how does it measure up to the reality of the time that you're talking about? A simple thing like 2 children born in the same year in different towns, and then it goes from there. Now, back in 2018, MyHeritage and their staff had a number of individuals who were basically trained and professionals to do a very large survey. And what they did with this is they compiled all the records on MyHeritage, the billions of records, and all the people in all the family trees on MyHeritage, and all the people in the family tree on Family Search, and all the source records of both Family Search and MyHeritage. All that information, put it into one huge computer program, and started asking questions of the data. And people are able to do things like this. So the statement here was that before 1750, most Americans found a spouse within 6 miles of their birthplace. In those born in 1950, it had stretched to 60 miles. But even in 1850, the average person at least married someone who was a 4th cousin, and today it's about 7th cousins. And now they found between 1800 and 1850, they traveled further than ever to find a mate, nearly 12 miles on the average. So basically it was a supply and demand kind of thing, because there weren't that many people. But on the other hand, if you start thinking about these distances, you realize that you're pushing the envelope when you get past that 6 miles to 6 to 10 miles radius around any given spot. So when you do these mappings and you realize the distances that are involved, if it was late 1700s and it's 40 miles away, that is simply not going to happen in most rules. And if you do think it's true, then basically you've got to do a lot of research to make sure that you have the right people and given that time frame. So this is the scientific analysis that created that underlying idea. And the reality now today is that every square inch of the world's surface has been mapped. We have maps for every place, and they're high resolution digital maps, and you can see almost every place in the world in high resolution maps. And so finding the locations is still a challenge, as I did when I was looking for one in the Czech Republic the other day. And since I don't speak Czech, I had to listen to what they said for the place name and see if I could figure out how that was spelled, and then look for the place. But finally, I realized that they should just type it into the chat. So they typed the names in the chat. So I could find them instantly on the map. So, but they're all there. The maps are all there. And our greatest tool today's are the ones that we can use that are online. And I'll get into those in just a minute. Here's an example. For example, this is the kind of thing that happens here. You see the birth date is before 1735, and the death date is 1828 in England, and there are 11 sources. My answer is, what is on those 11 sources? Because how in the world did you get this person's name out of 11 sources if you didn't know anything about when they were born and or where they died? So this is the kind of thing that that becomes highly suspect. And when you do get to this, you realize that these people do not really exist. They've got a name, they've got some dates, but as far as any kind of reality is concerned, meaning a correspondence between actual historical records and this individual, they do not exist. And so it's just a situation where you need to be more perceptive about what's happening when you're just looking at it, when you're looking at the entries in a family tree. So the biggest issue, and the first issue that needs to come up, is the place that an event occurred in an ancestor's life. That's where what we need to know. And England, it's not a place in this sense, because it has to be an identifiable place with enough specificity to have attracted some records. There are hundreds and hundreds of parishes in England, and how do you even begin to guess, given a name that seems fairly common? Okay, so every person in every family tree should be identified by a specific place and a parent-child relationship. So if you have your going back and you go back in your pedigree and you find that, and you look at every single step in the pedigree, which I do regularly with everything I do, and you look through each one of those, and the thing you're looking for isn't census record. Well, maybe a census record if it shows parent-child relationship, but any record that shows parent-child relationships. And sometimes I will find every child in the pedigree, every child in the entry with their parish register, their christening and baptism dates, and everyone has marriage dates, but no one has the date has any record for who the parents of the husband are, and yet the pedigree goes on and on and on, back and back. That's what we mean. When you're missing that document, you're basically not. You've gone off into unreality. You've gone off into an imagination place. So this whole thing is partially aimed at avoiding the same name, same person trap. And I got into that the other day. It happens to the best of us. It is very difficult sometimes. I found a set of records, and a person's name and their husband's, the wife's name was the relative I was looking for, and the husband was the spouse, and they matched, and the children matched, and I went through census records and they all matched. And when I got to the end, they started to see some problems. And eventually it turned out that there were two different families living almost in the same area. Very, very physically very close to each other, where the husband and the wife both had the same names in both families. And the children all had names that were mixed in with each other. There was a Mary, and there was a Catherine, and there was a Thomas, and there was a George. And in other words, superficially looking at it, you would have thought these were the same families. And after I'd gotten all this information, I realized and found records and finally looked at what I was looking at, and found that there was two problems. One of the people named was a carpenter. The other person named was a pipe fitter, an engineer pipe fitter. So there were two different people. And then I had to go through and not look by places, but look by the occupations and split the two families. And then I had to back all this stuff out of the family search family tree that I had put in. So don't go down that path unless you're willing to pull everything out and start all over again. So if you use, for example, a program like Find My Past, you can, and if you just want to use it to find the name, the frequency of a name, it's a very simple, marvelous tool. You just go to a complete search, a detailed search, and you put in the last name. And when you put in the last name, it will automatically at the bottom give you the exact number of records that have that particular name. And that's a rough, let's say, rough approximation of how frequent that name is in the world. And I found situations where the name would have fewer than a dozen records out of all the records on millions and millions of records on Find My Path. Then there's only a few people with that name. You can very well even not just guess, but be pretty much assured that every one of those people were related in some way. On the other hand, very common names like Smith and Jones can have 5 or 6 million records for their in the database. And this one is 661,000, and it's I'd say medium low. In other words, it's about in the middle of the range of the records, but it's in the lower range of the middle of the records after looking at hundreds and hundreds of these. And so basically, when you know that there's a distinct possibility that there are going to be a lot of people in any given year period, any time period, that have the same name. You're never going to find unique names when there's that many people, that many records of this particular surname. So you do it again, and here's another one. Let's say I do it for prior, but I put in a year, and there's still 13,000 people named James Pryor in that year that were born within 2 years of 1828. So which one is it? And they're born all over England, by the way, from London to all over all the different counties of England. So there's just no way that you're ever going to find James Pryor by simply looking for his name. Even looking for his name and a date, unless you know exactly where that person came from, then you're never going to separate him out of this list. And so that's the importance of the location in this whole thing. So my analogy here is that without a location, it's like sitting in a boat in the middle of a large lake and trying to hit a specific fish with a rifle. Let's say you just start shooting into the water. What are the chances that you're going to hit a fish? Not very high. What are the chances that you're going to find a specific fish? Not very high. But if you just start looking for a name in England or a name in the United States, that's exactly what you're doing. It's the same exact issue. Okay, so basically, it's time to spend some of your time initially and continually during the process of research is having a map and checking how likely are all of these different places to be accurate. And so you can say how far it is from, to, and basically see where all these little places are. And when you're on Google Maps, you can go to Street View. It's the little yellow guy called Pegman down in the corner. You pull him out and the roads all show up, and you stick him on the place that you want to see. And then you get a view from the street, from Google Street View. This works in most all of the European countries and a lot of other countries around the world, of course, all over the United States and North and South America and places like that. The only place that really it doesn't work too well is in Germany, and they just don't like Google for some reason. Probably good reasons, but they don't like them, and so they don't have maps of Germany. But here you can see immediately what kind of a community it is. And I do this routinely because I like to see if it actually looks like a town that could have existed during the time frame that we're talking about. Those two chimney buildings, the houses with the chimney on each end, those are early 1800s buildings or even earlier. If they're not two-story in a box like that, the cracker box kind of shape, then they are probably later, because almost all the old houses were built like that. And then there's older ones, and you can usually tell those by the materials, the rock, the stonework that's done. And always look up the place names in Wikipedia. You'll be, hopefully, if you haven't done this consistently, hopefully you'll be surprised to see how almost every little tiny spot, place, population spot on the face of the earth has a Wikipedia entry. It's easily the most comprehensive geographic database that exists. And in every case, it will tell you over here on the right-hand side of the screen, it'll tell you which different jurisdictions this particular place is. So Ramsey is Cambridgeshire, but if you read the history down here, you'll find that it was in a different county, different named county before that in Huntingdonshire, and it was only lately that it was moved into Cambridgeshire. Actually, about 1974, when England redid their county boundaries and things all over the country. And it gives you all this information, and that's the blow up of what was on the screen there, so you could see a little better. You can see all of the things that it grew up with around and how long it's been there, and that's what's important to understand. All genetically valuable records are created at a specific place and time. I mean, these things are like, yeah, I mean, why would you think otherwise? But if you don't think through that process, then you're liable to make mistakes that you otherwise would not make. And here we're back to Huntingdonshire, and this is the Family Search catalog, and it has Ramsey, and you can see this is the way that the place is, how it's organized. It's a part of England, part of Huntingdonshire, and it's Ramsey. Now, sometimes the trick here is guessing how the catalog people put this together, because it's getting a familiarity with a specific catalog in a library or in any institution that will help you understand where you look for things and where they might be found. And sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge. Now, a good example of the whole process is a burial. If a person died and was buried, he or she is in one spot. They're not 10 miles away. There's not two of them at the same time. It's one person, and that one person is in one place. And so basically, you need to find the spot. In other words, it's not just a question of they were buried in Arizona. Well, that helps you not. And if they were buried in which county in Arizona, like Maricopa County, that still doesn't help you. You need to know the exact spot of that burial. And here's a program that does that. This is billiongraves.com, and it has a direct link to GPS coordinates for every grave that's put in here. In fact, the way that you put them in here is use a smartphone or a tablet and actually take a picture of the website and have it connected to the internet. And then the program records the coordinates of that grave to the foot. Using Billion Graves, you can walk pull the cemetery up on a map and walk directly to a grave. So that's where the help is. Here's an example of that with the grave markers, and in that same place in Ramsey, England. What about name changes? Well, geographic names change with politics. And so there's, in some places in England, in Europe, the politics have been such that there are a number of name changes. One of those places is what we call Poland. And it has been, when it was run by Germany, all the place names were changed into German. And when it was run by Russia, all the place names were turned into Russian. So almost every town in Poland has three names: a German name, a Polish name, and a Russian name. And there are websites that crack this code. So what they do is they list all the towns and then all of the three names for each town. So you can look it up either way. Now, that's a lot you can do online also. And you may need to find old maps. And this is a large collection, and it's called the David Rumsey Map Collection. It's very interesting, and you can download most of the maps, and basically they're organized, again, geographically by years. And so you can just go to a geographic area and find the map that you want of that area in the time period that you need. The reason that helpful about this is because of the changes in names, and because places where people used to live have been abandoned and there's no longer anyone there. You get into old maps, you may very well find that place on an old map. So now here are the two basic tools that I've talked about. One is Google Maps program, and the other is Wikipedia. And these are kind of the basic ways to work your way through this issue of finding the exact location and then seeing whether the distances that are mentioned implicitly by putting down two different places are reasonable in the time period. And if you want to know where the records are, then geographically organized is the Family Search Research Wiki. And in addition to this, there's a large genealogical component of the Family History Guide. So the fhguide.com also has the links to a lot of the resources, more from a learning standpoint, and the Research Wiki. Both of them, the Research Wiki is a wiki, and the Family History Guide is a website. And the Family History Guide website basically is the one that is oriented towards how to do it, rather than simply telling you, here's the record, try it, kind of attitude of the Research Wiki. So if we go back here, the whole purpose and the whole issue here is location, location, and you guessed it, location. Because without that, you're basically floating free. You have no contact with reality. And whatever it is you find, whatever information you think you have, is probably not accurate. So it's just a fundamental way of looking at how genealogical information is organized and presented. Okay. Well, thanks for watching. Anybody have any questions?
Great, James. I'm not seeing anything in chat.
Okay.
So looks like you got through just fine. That's some really interesting stuff. I hadn't thought about a number of those. Whatnot. I need to spend Google Maps. To me is just fascinating because I've gone back and looked at where some of my people were from and had no idea before Google Maps.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it, and in times there's lots of other presentations that I've done, but one of the ones, for example, you can find, if you find a legal description of piece of property, like in back east or wherever, we can say back east when we live in Utah, that like a meets and bounds description, you can actually use the meets and bounds description to go into Google Earth, which is the kind of the, big program for Google Maps, and plot. It'll help you. There's programs that'll help you plot that on a map on the Google Earth, show you exactly where it is. And if it's the state survey system, the like townships range meets, not instead of meets and bounds and directions, it's the northwest quarter of the southwest quarter of the of section, so forth. All those are can be mapped out on the map. So if you have that state survey description of your property, then you can just put it into a program, just fill in the blanks, and it'll take you to Google Maps, and plop, there it'll be showing you the boundary right on Google Maps. So there's lots of things out there that'll help you find a specific locations, and it's just a background of everything that goes on in genealogy, and I like to talk about it because at least it helps people start to think that maybe this John Smith isn't the same as this other John Smith.
Fascinating stuff. There's another program in our archive here on granitefhc.com. It was a class done about a year ago by Chris Cummings. And it's absolutely fascinating because he, as far as doing locations, he primarily focused on finding family plots and graveyards using drones. And he talked about how that works and how they located them and use the GPS mapping and everything, and we're able to go into these graveyards all over and find this information, and then it got put up on the internet. So it's fascinating. If you get a chance, you gotta look at that program. Pretty cool. Well, thank you so much. And thank you all for watching. And that concludes tonight's class. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.